maybe with that in mind, a good place to start might be what exactly it is that you do spend your whole day talking about. Because one thing that I enjoy about listening to you speak on running is there's a broad field that you can speak to. Um, but I know there's elements of real focus within that. So maybe as a foundation, you could give a bit of an introduction to what it is you actually do in the world of running.
Sure. So I started out as just a physical therapist that loved to treat runners. And when I first started, there weren't a lot of like running medicine PTs. So there wasn't really the niche in the field. It was just either sports or orthopedics in the US. And I really felt like that wasn't doing it justice. So I kind of dove down the rabbit hole of running because I was a runner and a triathlete myself. And I felt like we were being, every time you go into a clinic, someone thinks you're crazy if you're a runner, or that was the case um, a long time ago. Still, it happens a lot, but not in my clinic. But physicians would tell you just stop running, or PTs would say, oh gosh, there's a runner on my schedule. What am I going to do with them? And so I really took that along with my love for running and started to really jump into this running medicine. And in the US, it started about 10 years ago in Virginia, really. And it's been this really cool thing, just learning about running as much as I could. And then now I'm one of the people that teaches other therapists how to treat runners. So I do gait analysis. I do lots of multidisciplinary care. So I helped build the Atlanta Track Club elite multidisciplinary team, which is really, really cool because we have a sports dietitian, a sports psychologist, we have MD, PT, chiropractor, performance director, and the coach all together. And we work together on a regular basis to make sure that our athletes stay healthy and perform at their best. So that's something I do on a weekly basis. I meet with that team. I see some of those athletes, and then we're working on strategies all the time to make things better. Whether it's developing new strength and conditioning programs, or it's how do we position our athletes in the best place so that they know what they need to do to perform better, or education sessions. And then I do some research. Actually, we have a poster that's going to be live in a couple of weeks about beliefs, attitudes, and knowledge of runners. So we looked at kind of what runners believed and what we believe in the medical profession, and kind of looked at that mismatch, which was really interesting. And then I don't know, I write books, and I created an app for runners, and the app is called Run Source. And I brought together so far, and I'm building it, 50 experts in running medicine across the United States. I have somebody in the UK, and I have somebody in Canada so far, where we just kind of share all of our knowledge about running and running medicine and what you can do to recover better, to stay injury free, to get faster, all of those things. So and I speak and I consult on difficult cases. So like you said, it's kind of everything. But it's because my brain doesn't stop, and I really love running, obviously. And so I've kind of figured out how to take this passion of mine and look at it across the spectrum.
And it's one of those fields as well. I've been involved in this sport now. I'm 38. I got started when I was 12. So it's like 26 years. And so many times I felt like I was on the precipice of knowing everything about running. And then all of a sudden, something new comes out and the whole philosophy of training changes. I
Yes.
mean, more recently, I know it's not a new philosophy, but the way that it's trending is just like the zone two training focus has been a really interesting one to watch. Just not just top level athletes speak about, but you see the community level runner who's at their park run on a Saturday talking about how they've just been focused on their zone two heart rate goals. And it's, I mean, it's just an absolute field of opportunity when it comes to learning new things. Cause yeah, once you think you've got it, there's something else on the horizon. Really interesting what you were saying about the mismatch
Mm.
between the beliefs between runners and the medical industry.
Yeah.
What, what was that?
Well,
Like, what was the sort of motive behind that? Because that's like a whole new area I've never heard someone
Well,
speak to.
that's because I don't know that people are talking about it, and that's why we just did some research on it, or started that research, and we have that poster, and then eventually the paper coming out, starting to look at that. And it's something that I've known for a long time because being in the running community, people don't want to see healthcare providers because they're afraid that we're going to tell them to stop running, or they think maybe they could find the best answer on ChatGPT or Google or whatever it is. And in a lot of ways, there is good information out there. There really is. And a lot of things now, people are at least starting to implement the research a little bit better across different platforms. But the problem is that what we know as medical professionals, and what runners know, there's just a disconnect because the research takes years to get into society. Like, I read something where it takes 15 years for a paper to actually be put in practice in medicine. And it takes about 7 or 8 years for a paper to be put into practice in PT. And so a lot of times there's even providers don't know what the newest research is out there. And then to compound all of that, we do have all of these places we can find information. And what we found in the paper that I'm working on is that people actually use a lot of medical terms and anatomy and physiology, but they use them incorrectly all the time. And so places like, platforms or chat groups that people are on, whether it's Reddit or something else, a lot of times people are giving advice to other runners because they've had the same injury, but they're actually using incorrect medical terms. So now they're telling this other person what to do, but they're using terms that aren't even right. And on top of it, every injury is so individual and multifactorial that what you did might not help me.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of my personal experiences with injury more recently that I'm sure the audience here is probably sick of me talking about, so I'll just go on briefly, was I'd struggled a lot with calf strains after a few years away from competitive running. And just by nature of trying to navigate my way through it, I realized there was certain recommendations that I was trying to implement that were right, but the balance of those factors were really interesting to try and get. So for me, one of the rehab treatments or one of the rehab practices that my PT gave me was, hey, okay, we want to incrementally just increase some intensity through those calves in the gym as you welcome back quite slow running. And so I started to do that. But then one of the adjustments I forgot to make was as my running mileage started to increase again, I was like, oh, I'll keep putting pressure through the calves. And before long, it just went again. And so even it was interesting you mentioned Chat GPT because I've played with that from a training perspective. And I know it's early days, but it's really interesting some of the general advice that it throws out, but trying to put that into practice and make it fit for where you're at specifically still seems like it's lingering, which makes sense. It's relatively new in the scheme of things. But it was so helpful for me just to be able to bounce off my PT. Look, what's going on here? Because I'm doing what you said. And he's like, all right, let's talk about 15 different
Yeah.
things. And I was like, oh, okay. And it was through unpacking all of that I was like, oh my gosh, that was so obvious. But I get that fear as well of not wanting to go to a medical practitioner because you just think the only thing they're going to say is to stop running. And I think that's one thing I actually enjoy about what it is that you do is you seem to flip a lot of stones in the research that you're doing. Like you seem to look under a lot of rocks to go, hey, what's behind this?
Yeah.
There's no blanket statements. There's a real deep dive. And maybe with that said, I know there's a lot of people in my particular field, maybe with not the same injuries, but whether it's an overuse injury or whether it's just nagging niggles that I think probably don't need to be there. And I thought maybe a scaffold or a foundation to launch our conversation upon was just some of the common misconceptions or training errors that people are making that are just leading to really unnecessary niggles and injuries.
Yes, so this is a huge topic, and I'll try my best. I'll try my best.
I mean, 5 hours today. You still cool with?
Yeah, I think it'll probably be broken up into several sessions. But the way that we can start this is there are a few things that are very, very common. So we've probably all heard this, but we don't really know what it means. So when I say it, I'll try to explain what it means as well. But there's that idea of too much too soon. And so what that is it's too much load, and it can be physical load, it can be mental load. That's something that a lot of people don't actually realize. So too much load on an actual structure, say the Achilles tendon, for instance, because that's a very common injury, or it can be too much load in your life, like what you're doing. You're really stressed out. You're running here and there. You're not able to do training one day, so you double it up the next day. And so it's too much, too soon, too intense. Those are usually the things that really drive injury. Training error is the number one injury. Um, and again, that's said all the time, but what does that look like in your life? So a training error might not be something that you think it is. It could be that you're following this program that's been perfectly written for you by your coach and it's supposed to work out. But then something happens in your life that changes that mental load. And then that program doesn't work for you anymore. And you don't realize it because you might not even know that you're stressed out. And so that happens a lot. But then also when it comes to training load from a physical standpoint, perhaps the muscles, so we'll talk about calves because we started to talk about it. Perhaps your calves don't have the ability to do the work that you want them to do. So maybe they're not strong enough. Maybe you don't have they're not pliable enough. Maybe you haven't done enough plyometrics. So that spring that you're supposed to use when you're running isn't able to load in an appropriate way. And so those are really the big things when it comes to injury. Now, we can also say nutrition and sleep are probably my top two things, in addition to what I just talked about, that I think people have to manage it from a basic needs standpoint before they can even think about their plyometrics or, a cold plunge or, looking at how much they're sweating. So all of that, I think, really sets the foundation for staying injury free. Although I hate the word injury free because we're just mitigating our risk. As athletes, the truth is we're going to use our bodies, and we should. And the way that we use our body is going to put us at risk, some risk for injury. And we can only control so many things at a time because we're human. So what we have to do is we have to figure out what can we control and what can we give up in control. Is it okay if we miss a run that was on our schedule because life happened?
Yeah, that's a really good point. That mental aspect is one that I think I noticed through this podcast we speak about a lot, but I think when it comes to the practice of it, it's still not taken that seriously. Like I know there's a lot of talk around the benefit of mindset in performance and looking at the best athletes in the world and the way they perceive highs and lows that they experience. But I would say there's an obsession with training structure, training volume and intensity, which makes sense. I understand it's a big part of the recipe. But when it comes to actually having some sense of like sympathy, maybe for where you are in your current
Yeah.
life or where you are in your life currently, um, a lot of us just completely look over the impact that has on our running performance.
Yeah.
Like, are there any standout sort of warning signs, I guess, for lack of a better phrase,
So
that athlete look out for?
I think that one of the things you have to do is when you're planning races, think about your life, right? So if you have a key race, so say you want to run the Boston Marathon since it's next week, right? You want to run the Boston Marathon. Think about what's happening around April 21st, 2025. Are you going to be graduating? Are you switching jobs? Are you getting married? Do you have a baby that's coming? If any of those things are true, maybe that's not the race for you at this time. So I think timing of your races is really important. And obviously, if you qualify for Boston, it's one of those things where you're probably going to do it anyway, but at least have the knowledge that those other things impact you and build it into your training schedule. And I know that this is so much easier said than done because we're human. But we also know that if you mitigate that, if you start to think about that, you actually perform better because you're not wiping yourself out. Your body can recover better. You can be faster. You're not going to get injured as often, or at least you don't have the same amount of risk.
Yeah. I was speaking to a guy yesterday. Like one of the intro things that I do whenever I'm potentially going to work with a new athlete is just like a free 30-minute coaching call. And yesterday I caught up with this guy. He's 48. He lives in Sydney, and he was explaining to me that he started running. So I think it was around COVID. He'd moved from cycling into running a little bit more, and he said some of his training partners had really started to develop when it came to their running, really started to progress. And he said his progression has sort of stagnated a little bit. And it was funny because as we were speaking, it was amazing how many different directions you can take a conversation like that. Like, what does your training look like? What's your nutrition? Are you stressed? Have you had a blood test?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, have you had downtime? Are you targeting particular? And it's really interesting. And I mean, this probably goes in that category of mindset in the sense that it's often overlooked. Just
Mm.
how many different pieces that are taking play in your life at any one time can have an impact on how it is that you perform.
Yeah.
Is that something that you work with specifically with athletes that you coach? Because it's the mindset's one that I'm fascinated in my own life. I'm constantly catching myself like just in negative spirals where I'm like, hey, this isn't the best way to perceive this situation. What are you doing? And despite that, despite knowing that I'm still sometimes lazy getting on top of it, but I know when I'm consistent with it for a couple of days, I feel better just in myself, let alone just getting out there and run. Because nothing feels worse than running when you're stressed, for example. I mean, it's always nice to come back from that run, but I feel me trying to get into like top form when I'm like all pent up is like, oh yeah, it just feels
I
great.
know, and then it just creates the anxiety, and you're going around and around and around, and it just doesn't help at all. Um, so actually, one of the things, so I consult for difficult cases all the time from everywhere, and the reason that I do that is because of this very thing. So what happens a lot, whether it's healthcare or people trying to figure out what's wrong on their own, they don't one know what to look for. And the way I see this in running medicine in the United States, this is what we do. This is what we're really good at. And that is looking at this huge holistic picture. And so I do that. I actually have all these intake forms to ask all of these questions. And then if you are going to see me, I'll usually ask for any notes from any provider if you want to share them, or and your coaches and anything else you might need me to know. And I go through shoes, I go through nutrition, I go through sleep, I go through training for the last 3 months. I go through all of that before I even talk with somebody, so that I can have this clear picture. And usually, even from that information or from a 30-minute conversation, I can pick up what's been missed for them and what they need to hone in on. And it's just because it is so much, but when you've done it for so long, you can really see those patterns.
Yeah. Nutrition and sleep you
Mm.
mentioned were like really standout features to you. I think it's been interesting thanks to people like Matthew Walker with his books on sleep and so many of the podcasts and information he's released that it's become it's funny. It's one of those things that's obviously just existed forever and we've overlooked the power of it
It's like
in
the
a name of
cheapest
like
thing.
Powerade. Yeah. It's that's what frustrates me so much about it. Before we hit record, I told you I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I'm so desperate on, I'm so desperate to like focus on my sleep. And last night, I woke up to my 2-year-old screaming like, "I want an ice cream in a cone." I'm like, dude, well, I want a good night's sleep because I'm going to be grumpy tomorrow. Like, where's the midpoint? But nutrition is another one, and I know nutrition's a really spiky subject to enter into because whenever I start delving into it, I get hundreds of emails from people saying that's not the right way. You've misunderstood the science. You shouldn't be saying that. But whatever, it's an interesting conversation. When you speak about nutrition, like where are we starting? Where does that conversation begin? What are we looking
Yeah,
at?
the first thing I want to know is if you're getting enough. Like, bottom line, are you getting enough nutrition? Because we know that low energy availability and REDS is linked to injuries. Many, many injuries, most injuries will have some bit of nutrition related to it. And it's typically that low energy availability. That's right. Drink your smoothie. Um, so you and low energy availability is something that we've seen in the research, which is really interesting, is that you can have low energy availability within a day, and you can also have it, over time. So mostly we look at low energy availability as calories in, calories out. How many calories do you have for your basic function? And then how many calories do you have for the exercise that you're doing? And is that matching? And so what we've known is to look at that in terms of like each day and each week. But now what we're finding is that even those fluctuations within the day, if you're not timing calories necessarily correctly, or at least thinking about, hey, I should eat something before I run or after I run, then you are again at a little bit higher risk for an injury. So it doesn't have to be complicated. So when we're talking about injury, we just start there. Like, are you getting enough? And when are you eating? And then we can move into more complicated things. I don't believe there's any one right diet. I've, listened to lots of conversations about it, and I work very closely with several sports dietitians. I think it's different for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. People hate hearing that.
Oh, they
Hey,
hate it.
it is.
They hate anything. Everyone hates the "it depends" answer, and that's just the answer so many times. Yeah.
But it's so interesting. You look at even just the training volume and intensity. Some athletes like to run 300 or 200 miles a week. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? But some athletes can do better with like a lot less, but cross training on top of that. And it's really fascinating. I can imagine just how true that is for nutrition. I mean, on a broad scale, it's the same here in Australia. You've got the acronym, the standard American diet, that SAD diet that so many people, look at the food they're eating and they probably, I think it's definitely improving, or at least my eyes have been open to it. Um, just how many foods that we would label as
Oh,
healthy,
yeah.
which in fact are actually just terribly unhealthy. I was listening to a guy on Joe Rogan's podcast last night. I can't remember his name. It was really interesting though. He was speaking about how there's so many labels on food with the heart healthy
Oh,
tick
that aren't healthy. Yeah.
in the States, which are actually, I don't think I'm misquoting, but he was speaking about how the heart healthy tick is on like soda for ration packs. And it just so turns out that Pepsi and Coca-Cola are two of the biggest contributors to like heart health, like that heart health foundational organization. And you go, oh my gosh, like we're fighting a big battle when, the people that you look to for some trust and some hope are all of a sudden recommending things that you and I both well know are terrible for you.
I know. I mean, so I live in this community where we have an organic farm. And so I'm pretty lucky in that I just eat real food. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do like sweets, so sometimes that happens. But we eat a lot of real food because it's right at our fingertips. Anything like we'll go get eggs from the chickens, you know what I mean? Or we'll get fresh meat delivered to our house, or we will just go to the farmer's market on the weekend and we get fresh sourdough bread and all of our veggies. And so when I talk to my athletes, I'll just talk about like, hey, first of all, I don't dive into the nutrition very, very deeply because I usually will recommend a sports dietitian because they are much better at that than I am, and they should be. I just touch on the major themes, right? And so we'll talk about: are you eating real food? Food on the edge of the supermarket for us. Do you have access to that kind of thing? Is your plate colorful? And then we talk about performance plates because that's something that our sports dietitians that I work with talk about a lot, which how many carbs and protein and veggies are on that plate. And there's like a diagram and, is it 25%? Is it 50% based on what type of workout you're doing? So that's a really good way to start a nutrition conversation with somebody and a very basic way to start going down the right path.
Yeah. There's an obsession, and I know maybe I'm sort of dragging you in the direction you don't want this to go, and I'm happy to drag it back out in more your forte in just a moment. But it's interesting, like speaking of obsessions and just standard conversations around food, like that protein conversation is really big, but maybe one that is, I don't know, I feel like there's a tendency for a lot of people to go to a supplement or something extra to hit like, if you say you need more protein, a lot of people go, "Oh, I need protein powder." But what I've realized in my own life is I actually don't need protein powder. I just need to be keeping myself accountable with the food that I'm eating to make sure I'm hitting the target. So for me, I've just got like a general guide each day. I'm trying to hit around 100 grams of protein, just like give or take. And I can usually do that pretty easily if I'm focused throughout the day on, oh, like have some eggs, a bit of yogurt here, have some nuts, whatever else.
And I think that a lot of
But
people
here's
can do that, but I also think it depends on your life, right? So a lot of people that I know, including myself sometimes, I
yeah,
can't
yeah,
make it without a protein shake because I'm rushing from one thing to the next. And if I don't grab my 30 grams of protein in my protein shake in the morning, I'm in a deficit. And so I think we have to allow people to do what works for their life, as long as it is, isn't within this idea of healthy and not, not soda as heart healthy food, but actual real food. And I do think, yeah, protein powder, like Stacey Sims talks about throwing your protein powder in your coffee. I'm all for that if that works for you and it gets it in there.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, we've got a collagen powder that we'll put
Yeah.
into our coffee. It's taken me 7 trials because my coffee tasted off for about 7 months before we found one that was pronounced.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm not gonna mess with my coffee. I like it a certain way, and I will not be putting protein powder in it, but some people can. I just drink the protein shake. I'm like that. I think I see this all the time, like these things that make fun of women in my age group that have, like, all these drinks. This is me. I've got, like, a water, I've got electrolytes, I've got a shake, I've got a coffee, and I'm trying to bring them all into the car while I'm going somewhere.
I'm kind of embarrassed that you said that it's women in your age group because I feel like you just described me in many days.
Well, I'm glad to hear it then. Maybe it's just athletes.
Oh man, yeah, it could be that. It could be that. I want to bring it back a little bit to sort of. I know this when you boil it down, like nutrition, sleep, real practical injury
Mhm.
prevention tips. But when it comes to more specific ideas, more like daily practices outside of those recommendations, are there things on a broad scale that you recommend outside of that that we all should be doing just to make sure that we're giving ourselves the best opportunity to at least mitigate
Yeah.
those injuries that otherwise would sort of keep hunting us
Well, I
down?
think that we have to be strong. I mean, we absolutely have to be strong. Strength is non negotiable in my book. I mean, I consider that it's not on that lowest level of basic needs when it comes to because if you're not sleeping, you're not eating, strength's not going to matter. But if you've got your basic needs covered, I definitely think that strength is so very important. I think that one thing that happens with that is it can be overwhelming, it can be intimidating for people to think about like how am I going to structure this program, what's good for me as a runner. I've never been to a gym before, what is it, how do I use the things, right? So for strength training, it doesn't have to be hard. It can be as few as 2 times a week, as many as 4. Somewhere in there, whatever works for you. So some weeks I get 2 times a week, sometimes I get 3. I very rarely get 4 times a week in the gym, but if I can, I will. And that includes functional movements and weights. So I do functional movements for runners, which are things that help with my hip hinge, things that make sure I'm firing my posterior chain, so the back of my body, making sure that I'm getting my glutes and single leg strength, making sure I always make sure I do my calf raises eccentrically. So not just the fast up, but the slow down. I make sure, I'm doing hip thrusts and also something for my core, but not necessarily a core exercise. It might be Pallof presses because that helps with rotational stability. So I try to build a program that captures all of that, but doesn't take a long time. I do 9 exercises usually. So I'll do 3 exercises 3 times, and then I'll move on to my next rotation. And so that takes me about 45 minutes, and I do a little bit of warm up, and that's it. And I think that that's very reasonable. In the Run Source app that we created, we do have like circuits that are just 3 exercises that you can do at a time, especially for runners. And I'll always say, like, if you can just do 3 exercises, that's better than none. So just do something and do something that's functional so that it helps you running, but it can also help you in life.
Yeah. Yeah. So for anyone who's relatively new to the world of running, when we're saying functional fitness, we mean things like not just bicep
Oh,
curls,
yes.
just so your bicep is beautiful. Where did you want to unpack that a little bit more? Because I should have told you before we started, we've got a lot of relatively new runners who this might be like a foreign
Oh, sure.
concept to so many of them. So yeah, functional fitness. I mean, the description's probably in the title, but what does that look like as opposed to just like one muscle
Yeah.
exercise?
First of all, I love new runners. It's one of my favorite things because there's so much you can learn. And if we can teach new runners in the beginning, then they don't have to be injured. So that's my favorite. I'm really glad that there's a lot of new runners listening. So functional is basically like you said. So like if we think about a squat, right? When we sit down in a chair, that's a squat, right? When we go upstairs, we're doing step ups or so those are 2 types of exercises that we would do in the gym, squats and step ups. And they translate to going up and down stairs and sitting down in a chair and getting up from a chair. And that's what functional exercise is about using your body in a way that you would use it in your life and in your sport.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good I'm glad I threw that to you to describe because I knew I'd butcher it. I got nervous in front of you, so but I'm handing the baton over to you, to
I've been there.
are you, it just comes with the territory of podcasting, the amount of episodes I post where I go, "I can't believe I said that," or "I can't believe I described it that way." It's just, I mean, people keep coming back, so they're gluttons for punishment at this point, but yeah, I take less responsibility now that I used to, now that people are listening. Um, uh, in terms of structure, so, each session you just described the, 9 exercises, oh, sorry, 9, yeah, exercises, 3 reps. Is that the same for you all throughout the year, or are you varying sort of weights and exercises based on particular race plans or lifestyle plans or whatever else you might be navigating your way
Yeah,
through?
so my plans or the plans that I write for other people are like 6 to 8 weeks in length. typically.
Fine.
And so, because if you continue to do the same exercise over and over and over again, you're not inducing a new training load. So, we have to change, we have to stress our body so that it can adapt. And if we don't change the movement and we don't increase the weights, we're not stressing our body in a way that it can adapt and change and increase in strength and improve movement patterns. So I typically will build a program for 6 to 8 weeks, and it'll be 2 different workouts in those 6 to 8 weeks, and I'll switch them back and forth. So that's how I'll do it. And then within those two different programs, I'll change the weights and I'll change the way that I do it as I get better. So I might do a squat that's on an incline, right? So I might do a squat on an incline where the kettlebell is in front of me. So I'm trying to describe it in case anyone hasn't done it, but the kettlebell is in front of me. And I do that squat for a little bit. Well, if that gets too easy, I'll start usually with like 10 repetitions at an easier weight, just to make sure that I've got the movement down correctly. My heels are where they need to be, my knees are where they need to be. Then I will drop down to maybe 8 repetitions or 6 repetitions because I've increased the weight up. And then when that gets easy, I'll change that squat to make it, maybe it's like a squat that looks at, or that stresses adduction, so inner thighs more, so my toes are pointing out. Or maybe I'll drop it so it's not an incline squat. Or maybe I'll move where the weight is, put it on my chest or have it overhead. So there's so many different ways that you can do each movement. Being creative and changing that is how your body can change and adapt in a good way.
Yeah, it's funny because it can feel sort of stressful and overwhelming when you hear about all the variety that you can implement. But you said it best early when you said, "Hey, like just doing 3 exercises on a regular basis is going to do better than doing nothing." And so, I mean, I say that as a bit of an encouragement to
Yeah.
anyone who's listening, who's like, "Oh, it's too much. I'm not even going to start." Like, yeah, it is amazing just how when you. I heard a quote the other day. It's like, "Don't look for a running community. Just start running, and somehow they find you." And that seems to be true for like the knowledge that I pick up along the way. I think a lot of the time it's not necessarily through like just going down one particular rabbit hole that I just stumble across all the answers. It's like just through making so many mistakes along the way and having people like you come along and go, "Hey, what do you like? Put your feet this way or hold the bar this way," and you go, "Oh, okay." And over time, it just starts to come into place. Do you ever feel like that with the research that you're doing? Like you'll go down a particular direction so often, you're like, "Oh my gosh, like what do you mean? There's a whole field that I haven't even delved into or started looking at, like to my right."
Yeah, actually, or new research that comes out and you've been doing something the same way for 5, 10 years or however old I am. And then all of a sudden the new research says, just kidding, you were completely wrong. And then you think about all the patients that you were trying to help and that got better. And you're like, what was I doing? Yes, I think of that all the time.
And do you know how it's so comforting to hear that you struggle with that as well. I just thought it was us guys, but it's nice to know that that you're well and truly experiencing that as well. I feel like my version of that was growing up in the 90s, and remember, fat was the foe. Like you couldn't touch fat. Everything that was low fat was so healthy, and so I had the healthiest diet in the world apparently. And every time I went to the dentist, they're like, "You need more fillings." I was like, "What? I don't understand what's going on." Like I'm supposed to be the healthiest kid. That stuff does my head in. It's amazing how you can look back at like relatively recent history and go, "Oh, I can't believe we all bought into this particular idea at that time, and now we look at that as though it was just like a crazy joke."
Well, I think that that's what's the thing that's really important about research, and one, research, and two, experience, and then practice. Sorry, so research, experience, and practice, because we have to continually look at the research, and I do that all the time because I don't want to fall behind, and I love to learn new things, and I want to help my athletes in the best way that I can. So I'm constantly looking at the research, which is really important. And sometimes that research maybe doesn't make sense for what we're doing or doesn't work in that particular case, but it's still in the back of your mind. So I would say that our practice is research informed. We don't call it evidence based practice because not everything can be directly based on the research, but it can be informed by the research. And then if you think about practice, I've been practicing for a long time now. And over the years, you see patterns and being able to pattern match the way people do things and the way that injuries show up and the way that people move their body. And so now you take all of these patterns that you've seen over the years, over hundreds and thousands of athletes, and you put that together with the research that you're reading, new or old, and then you put that into practice. And sometimes, sometimes you're not right. And that's the truth. We all hope to be right, and we all do our very best to do our best, but sometimes you're not. And it's a really interesting thing. But that's what I love about my profession and what I do, is that I'm constantly learning and problem solving to help people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. That's a cool approach. I like the idea of it being problem solving, because all of a sudden it takes away some of the stress of like, I can't believe I didn't know this. And it's like, oh no, hey, look, there's a way to navigate your way through this new information. Is there any new information on your radar right now that's kind of in the category of what we're speaking about, blowing your mind or sort of open your eyes, or it's just come out of left field and you're like, what the like what's this?
Well, there's a couple things actually. So there's so much more coming out about female athletes, which I really appreciate, being a female athlete myself and treating a lot of female athletes. So, I feel like every other month something is coming out about bone stress injuries or low energy availability or the menstrual cycle. Train with your menstrual cycle. Don't train with your menstrual cycle. We don't know, like whatever it is. So there's a lot coming out right now for women, which is really incredible. And we have to do a very good job of looking at the research. And then again, like I said, looking at it and looking at the athlete in front of us and seeing how does that work, because it's so new. The other stuff that I've really learned a lot about lately is it's really funny. Is so, tendinopathies are something that we treat all of the time in running. It's an overuse injury that happens a lot. And whether it's an Achilles tendinopathy or a hamstring tendinopathy, and what I mean by tendinopathy is where the muscle attaches to the bone is the tendon, and that's what gets aggravated, right? So it's usually at the foot or at the high part of the butt or whatever it is, depending on what muscle it is. Um, but one of the things that's being studied right now in the NFL by a running researcher, Brian Heiderscheit, in Wisconsin, is hamstring injuries and recovery of hamstring injuries. And so for so long, we didn't want to stress them too much as we were healing them. So we would kind of let them recover, let them heal. And then you would start to slowly increase the weight and do some eccentrics. And then you would take them to about 80%. And then you would free them to the coach or the strength trainer. Well, what we're finding now is that's actually not how you should handle it at all. So for every 3 days off, I think, is it 3 to 7? I'm going to mess. Oh no, it's 1. So for every day you take off, it's 3 extra days of recovery is what they're finding. And that with these types of injuries, you actually need to stress it early, even if it's in a smaller range of motion. And so that's really interesting. And then also making sure that you're starting to do sprint work early on, like within the first or second week, even if it's 10 or 15 yards, because you've got to get that neuromuscular pattern. Because now we can see the research is actually able to look at how the muscles are built and how they're healing through ultrasound and imaging. And different parts of the muscle are actually we're not getting taxed in the way that they needed to recover to that 100%. So that's why re-injuries keep reoccurring, or excuse me, that didn't make sense, but injuries keep reoccurring is because we're not stressing the muscle, the tendon enough in the right ways so that it can fully heal. So that's been
Yeah, that blows my mind as well. It is so interesting because on paper you go, oh no, you've got to nurture it back to full health. And what they've discovered is what, as a result, like that nurturing's actually limit its capacity to be able to get back to that full explosive power.
Yes. And so I don't want everyone to think like, oh gosh, I have a tendinopathy, I should go sprint right now. So I don't want that to be the message that I just sent to everybody. I want to be very clear about that. So, because that is going to get me some hate mail on YouTube. But what I would like to say is that there has to be a structured way back. And in that structure, we have to really make sure, again, we are stressing those structures so that we can adapt and change and get strong, and do it in a way that makes sense for that athlete in that sport.
Yeah. Just to clarify, so just before you were saying, so for every day you take off, it was 3 days recovery. Did I say that?
3 extra days of recovery. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
a rough thing. And again, that's something I'm not sure I wanted to say out loud is true, but because people are going to be like, "Ah!" Like there are.
No, yeah, you already put the asterisk next to it, so you're safe. Um, That was just, I mean, at the risk of again just dragging you in a dangerous direction. Were you saying so? Is that for every day that you take off with the injury? I was trying to get my head around
Oh, so
what that means.
I wouldn't extrapolate it out to training, like everyday training for sure.
Oh,
No, I would not do that. So we have to have rest days. So I don't want that water to get muddied. We have to have rest days so that we can recover. We get stronger when we take a break if we stressed muscle tissue, but we just don't want to take so many days off so that we get the negative effects.
so
And if you're injured, a lot of times what happens is people will say, I'm just going to rest it because that's what I think I need to do. And that's not going to help. What we need to do is keep moving in a way that makes sense for that injury. The caveat, of course, is bone stress injury, where we will have to slow down and we'll have to unload it. But so there are a few injuries that we really, really do need that time off. But even with a bone stress injury, we're still able to do some level of cross training, some level of strength training, depending on what kind of injury it is, if it's in a critical location, and all of those types of things. But yes, you will lose for every day you take off in an injury, you lose 3 days of training. But you need to take a little bit of time off.
yeah, no, that makes sense. One of the things that sort of blew my mind a couple of years ago when I first struggled with this calf strain was I was listening to Bob and Brad on YouTube. Do you know those
Oh,
guys? The American PTs. They're like these dorky old guys that I don't know. I don't understand how they're so massive, but you watch their videos and they're dorky and they're quirky and they're popular. And I go, you know what? When you listen to it, they're actually really helpful. One of the things that these guys were discussing was with the calf strain after 3 days, like really getting your thumb. I don't know what research they were referencing, but they were referencing that. When I say the word research, it's just like this foreign land that I just don't really know. So I don't know whether what I'm referencing is credible or not. I'm just saying they referenced it. But
noted.
I was yes, just in case I butcher whatever Bob. I don't want Bob and Brad to lose their reputation because of what I'm about to say. Um, they were explaining that one of the good treatments for early calf strains is actually going to the muscle where the part of the tear is and actually doing some quite intense like massage into it. And they were speaking about how it can help regenerate the muscle fibers and help connect
Oh, so they're
a little
talking about deep
more.
friction. They're probably talking about deep friction massage, which you can do with. Yeah.
I should agree with
I think that
yeah.
that's what they're talking about. And again, I haven't seen it, so I'm not sure. But if they're talking about that, what they're probably referring to is that when collagen is interrupted, or if you have an injury that interrupts that collagen, when it lays back down, it lays down in a disorderly pattern. So most collagen, yeah, so most collagen is lined up in the direction of tension. And if it lays down a different kind, which is type 2 collagen. And then what happens is it becomes disordered. And so deep friction massage, I don't know what the paper is, but I've also heard this. And I know that in my residency, I read these papers, but I have no idea. They might be from the 80s for all I know. But
Sure.
but
I would guess with Bob and Brad that they are from the 80s. I just get
but they're probably so. But the deep friction massage is working through that area to help realign the collagen. Now, I don't know if we were to do a paper on that now and we actually looked at it under ultrasound, if that would be the case, if that's actually happening, but that's what was believed to be happening. And I will say that I use it with like ankle sprains and things like that, and it makes a huge difference. So even if the research is maybe not 100% on point for that, I think clinically, this is where the art and the science come together. It does really help.
Yeah, deep friction. Yeah, really interesting. I mean, I said at the outset, it's a conversation that you feel like you're just starting to scratch the surface when you get into it like this. Maybe we have to do around 2 and 3 if you're up for it.
I love it.
Because, I mean, there's so many different directions that we could cover. And um, are you obviously like majority of our audience is Australia, America, and the UK? I'm assuming you're working via
Yeah.
how do you call this from a
Yeah.
distance via Zoom or
I
whatever.
am. Yep. I'll talk to anybody who needs help. That's kind of the way that it's consulting. So that's the thing. If I were going to do actual healthcare, so you have to sign the form and everything, but it's you have to have a license in every state to practice in the United States. But what I do is consulting. I'm looking at I'm everything that you have, I'm putting it together and we're kind of going through it together. And that's a little bit different than sitting down and having a Zoom call where I'm, directing you in every single thing. And yeah, it's just different. And then also, I try to, if I know people in your area, this is part of why I created the Run Source app, is because every time I meet someone who's really amazing at running medicine or running knowledge, I ask, I'll be like, hey, do you want to be part of the Run Source app? And then, so now I have all these resources all over. And I also will, try to get people to pair up with those people in their area to get hands-on care if they need it or whatever it is that they need. I try to help kind of build their healthcare team for them if I can.
That's cool. No, that's what I really like about what it is that you do, because I've seen enough professionals, I think, that focus particularly on one injury, and they have a particular focus on that without looking at the rest of my life,
Yeah.
other factors that might have led to it. So I think that strikes a chord. I definitely did with me. I'll make sure I've got your stuff linked in the description. So for anyone interested in checking that out, they can get in touch with you.
Thanks.
Yeah, but hey, so appreciate you making the time. Thanks for your flexibility and your patience as I navigated how to use a calendar.
It's no big deal. Like I said before the call, I was so glad it wasn't me that got the time wrong because I was so sure it was going to be me.
Yeah, awesome. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for
Yeah,
that
thank
on.
you, Tyson. I really appreciate it.